Hey everyone, welcome back. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
The rain was coming down hard when I stopped in front of the main gate at Fort Liberty. Not the polite kind of rain that soaks your jacket and moves on. This was the kind that hits the pavement like gravel and runs down your collar in cold streams. My boots were already wet. I stood there with one hand gripping a torn canvas bag. The zipper was broken, so I had wrapped the top with a strip of duct tape. Inside were the only things I still owned that mattered: medical reports, treatment, summaries, psychological evaluations, and a stack of signed documents that proved exactly where I had been for the last 12 years. Paper has weight when it carries your life inside it. The guard at the checkpoint glanced at me once, then looked away. I couldn't blame him. From where he stood, I probably looked like someone who had taken a wrong turn on the highway. My jacket was faded. My hair was tied back with a cheap elastic band. My boots were old but still polished because habits don't disappear just because people forget who you are. I had just stepped forward toward the pedestrian lane when a black SUV rolled up beside the curb. I didn't need to see the license plate to know who it was. The window slid down slowly. Blair leaned her arm on the door like she had all the time in the world. Perfect uniform, captain's bars shining on her collar, hair pulled tight in a regulation bun that somehow still looked like it belonged on a recruiting poster. She looked at me from head to toe. Then she laughed. Not loud, just enough to let me know she was enjoying herself. "Well," she said, tilting her head. "Look at you." Her eyes stopped on the torn bag in my hand. "You look like a beggar standing outside the gate." I didn't answer. The rain kept hitting the hood of her SUV in quick, sharp taps. Blair sighed like the situation was inconvenient for her. "You realize this is a military installation, right?" she said. "People here actually have jobs." Her eyes flicked to the guard booth. "If someone takes a picture of you standing here, it reflects badly on the family." The family. That word used to mean something to me. Now it sounded like a company slogan. I shifted the bag in my hand and said, "I just need to go inside." Blair raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" She leaned forward slightly, studying my face, like she was looking at a cracked mirror. "You always had terrible timing," she said. I could smell the leather interior of the SUV even through the rain. "Let me guess," Blair continued. "You came here because you think someone owes you something." I looked at her for a moment. Then I said no. That answer surprised her. Her smile faded just a little. "You don't look like someone who belongs on this base," she said. "I used to." Blair let out a short laugh. "That was a long time ago." The guard at the gate pretended to check paperwork while listening to every word. Blair tapped her fingers on the steering wheel. "You should go home," she said, "wherever that is." I glanced at the gate behind her. "You know I can't." Blair's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I know exactly what you can't do," she said quietly. For a second, the rain was the only sound between us. Then she leaned closer to the open window. "You're not part of this place anymore," she said, "and you're definitely not part of this family." The words didn't hit the way she expected. That probably bothered her more than anything. Blair straightened up again and smoothed a raindrop off her sleeve. "You know what the funniest part is," she added. I waited. "You actually look surprised." She nodded toward my bag. "What's in there? Old medical files, therapy notes?" Her smile came back. "You always were dramatic." My hand tightened on the strap of the bag. Inside were reports from military hospitals in 3 countries. Inside were photos of burns on my arms. Inside were records from a classified operation that officially didn't exist. And inside were signatures that proved something Blair had been pretending for years. But I didn't open the bag. Not yet. Blair glanced at the gate again. "Listen," she said. "I have a briefing in 20 minutes. She pointed at the base behind her. "Real work." Her engine idled quietly. "You standing here isn't helping anyone," she said. I looked past her windshield at the rows of buildings inside Fort Liberty. Same roads, same fences, main concrete barriers. A place I knew better than most of the people stationed there. "You remember that warehouse near the motor pool?" I asked. Blair frowned slightly. "That was years ago," I nodded. "Yeah." The rain ran down my sleeves. "That was the night everything changed." Blair's expression hardened. "We're not doing this," she said. She reached for the window switch. "You need to move on." I stepped closer to the SUV. The guard straightened in his booth. Blair's eyes flashed. "Don't," she warned. "You know the truth about that night," I said. Her jaw tightened. "I know the official report," she replied. "The official report?" Blair had memorized it like a speech. I looked at the captain bars on her collar. "You got promoted after that mission," I said. "That's how the army works." I nodded slowly, then I lifted my sleeve. Just enough for the burn scars on my forearm to show. They ran across my skin like pale lightning. Blair looked at them for half a second. Then she looked away. "You should cover that up," she said flatly. "Why?" "Because people might ask questions." I lowered my sleeve again. The rain kept falling. Blair reached for the window controls. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said. The glass started sliding upward. "Blair," she paused. "What?" "You left me there," I said. Her eyes were cold now. "No," she said calmly. "I saved the mission." The window finished closing. Blair shifted the SUV into drive. For a second she looked straight ahead, not at me. Then she pressed the accelerator. The SUV rolled forward and passed through the gate, just like that. No hesitation, no second look. The red brake lights disappeared inside the base. I stood there in the rain for another minute. Then I walked toward the pedestrian checkpoint. The guard opened the small side gate and studied my ID. His eyebrows moved slightly when he read the name. He glanced up at me, then at the bag in my hand. "Long night?" he asked. I gave a small shrug. "Long 12 years. He handed the ID back. "Welcome to Fort Liberty," he said. I stepped through the gate and onto the base. My boots hit the wet pavement with a dull sound. Blair thought she had left me outside. She thought the story had already been written, but the truth was sitting inside this torn bag. And in a few hours, people much higher than a captain were going to read it. I adjusted the strap on my shoulder and started walking. But before I go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever been the person who did the hardest work in the room only to watch someone else take the credit while everyone applauded them? If that ever happened to you, tell me in the comments. I want to know how you handled it. My boots were still wet when I started walking down the road inside Fort Liberty, and the sound of them hitting the pavement pulled me back 12 years. Back to the night, everything between. Blair and me quietly changed. We were sitting at the kitchen table in our old house outside Fayetteville. The same table our father used to fix radios on when he came home from deployments. The wood still had burn marks from a soldering iron he dropped once. Blair had just opened the envelope from West Point. She stood there in the middle of the kitchen, holding the letter like it was a golden ticket. "Oh my God," she said, laughing. "I got it." Our father was sitting in his chair near the window, wrapped in a gray army blanket. His lungs had already started failing by then. Every breath sounded like it had to fight its way out. He smiled when Blair read the acceptance letter out loud. I remember the pride in his eyes. West Point meant something to him. He had spent his entire life believing in the army, discipline, honor, sacrifice. Blair walked over and hugged him. "You raised a future officer," she said. Our father coughed and nodded slowly. Then he looked at me, because he knew something Blair didn't. I had also been offered a slot. Not the same year, but close enough that one of us would have had to wait. The counselor from my high school had already explained it. 2 academy cadets from the same small congressional nomination district in the same cycle was rare. Not impossible, but rare. Someone was going to step aside. Blair was already talking about uniforms and leadership courses and how she was going to graduate near the top of her class. Our father watched her for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You two need to talk." Blair looked at me like the answer was obvious. "You don't even want it as much as I do," she said. That wasn't exactly true, but she believed it. And our father was getting worse every week. Hospital visits, oxygen tanks, prescription bills stacked in the kitchen drawer. Blair didn't notice those things. She was already planning her future. I remember looking at my father's hands resting on the blanket, the same hands that taught both of us how to field strip a rifle in the garage when we were kids. He looked tired, really tired. So I said the easiest sentence I could find, "Take the slot." Blair didn't hesitate. "Thank you," she said, like I had just handed her a spare pen. 3 months later, she was packing her bags for West Point. I stayed home. At first, the plan sounded temporary. "Just until Dad gets better," Blair said, during her first phone call from the academy. But Dad didn't get better. The medical bills kept coming. Blair kept sending pictures of parades, training exercises, and formal dinners in crisp uniforms. The army loved her. She looked perfect in photos. Meanwhile, I worked 2 part-time jobs and drove our father to appointments. One night, I opened the mailbox and found a final notice from the power company. That was when I made the second decision that changed everything. I enlisted. Not officer track. No academy, no ceremony, just a standard contract, and a recruiter who asked if I was good with logistics systems. Sure, I told him. The Army always needs people who can keep numbers straight. I went through basic training quietly, no family at graduation. Blair was too busy with academy commitments. When I arrived at my first duty station, Blair sent a message. Proud of you for finally doing something with your life. That was Blair's version of encouragement. Years passed like that. Blair moved through the officer pipeline quickly. Good evaluations, strong recommendations. She knew how to impress the right people. She also knew how to spend money. New car leases, expensive apartments near base. Designer bags she definitely wasn't buying on a lieutenant's salary. Every few months I would get a message from her. Hey, can you cover this for a bit? Short-term thing. Investment opportunity. I kept paying. At first I told myself it was temporary. Then I told myself it was family. By the 5th year, I stopped telling myself anything. The Army had moved me into logistics auditing by then. Paper trails, inventory systems, supply contracts. Numbers tell stories if you stare at them long enough. And Blair's numbers didn't make sense. One weekend I went home to check on the house. Our father had passed away the year before, and Blair said she had been handling the property paperwork. The front door key still worked. Inside, everything looked the same, except for one envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. Bank logo in the corner. I opened it. Mortgage statement. I read the line twice. Then a third time. Our house had never had a mortgage. Our father paid it off 20 years earlier, but the statement showed a large loan balance. I sat down at the same kitchen table where Blair opened her West Point letter, and I started reading the paperwork carefully. Second mortgage, signed documents, loan approval tied to a business investment account, borrower name Blair, collateral family property. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. The rain outside the window sounded exactly like it did today outside the base gate. Blair had taken a loan against the house, a big one. The money had already been transferred into an investment firm I had never heard of. I called her that night. She answered on the 3rd ring. What's up? She said casually. I'm looking at bank documents, I said. Oh, not surprised, just mildly annoyed. You mortgaged the house, I said. It's called leverage. Dad's house. Our house, she corrected. My hand tightened on the phone. You didn't ask me, Blair sighed. You're being dramatic. That house is paid off. It was. Silence filled the line. Then she said something that stuck with me for years. You make steady money, Blair said. You'll cover it if anything goes wrong. I didn't respond. She kept talking. This investment is going to triple in value, she said confidently. You'll thank me later. What if it fails? Blair laughed. It won't, she paused. And even if it did, you're good with numbers. That was the moment I realized something simple. Blair didn't see me as a sister. She saw me as a safety net. An ATM with a uniform. Someone who would quietly fix every mess she created. I hung up the phone and looked around the kitchen. Same table, same walls, same house our father fought to keep during 3 deployments. And Blair had signed it away like it was a credit card. I folded the mortgage statement and placed it back in the envelope. Then I opened my laptop and started checking the investment company she used. The numbers didn't just look bad. They looked fraudulent. And that was the first time I began keeping copies of everything. Every transaction, every transfer, every signature, including one signature Blair would eventually regret forging. I slid the copies of Blair's mortgage documents into a folder and locked them in my desk drawer that night. That was the moment I stopped fixing her problems. From that point on, I started documenting them. The Army moved me around a few times after that. Logistics units, procurement reviews, financial compliance audits. The kind of jobs people call desk work because they don't understand what the desk actually controls. Most soldiers think supply wins wars. They're wrong. Paper wins wars. Who signs it? Who approves it? Who blocks it? 12 years in the Army teaches you that the person holding the pen can quietly outrank a lot of people with shiny collars. By the time Blair made captain, I was sitting behind a very ordinary desk in a very quiet office inside Fort Liberty. No medals on the wall, no nameplate on the door, just a gray metal desk, 2 monitors, and access to a system most officers never even know exists. Strategic Command Budget Oversight. My job title sounded boring on paper. Strategic Audit Specialist. Most people translate that as someone who checks receipts. That's not what it means. It means every major operational expense flowing through the command structure eventually passes through our office. Equipment purchases, contract approvals, deployment logistics, training budgets. If something looks wrong, we freeze it. If it looks illegal, we escalate it. And if someone forged a signature inside that system, it becomes a criminal investigation. The best part about the job is that nobody notices you, until they do. The morning Blair arrived at Fort Liberty, the entire operations floor buzzed like a high school hallway. New captain coming in, someone said. Near the coffee machine. West Point grad, another soldier added. Apparently she's fast-tracking for command. I stayed at my desk and kept reviewing procurement logs. Blair always did like an audience. About 20 minutes later, I heard the door open, boots on the tile floor, confident steps, the kind that say someone is used to being watched. Then her voice. All right, everyone, quick introduction. I didn't look up. Blair loved speeches. I'm Captain Blair Hartwell, she said. I'll be overseeing the new media coordination project tied to the regional training initiative. Someone near the front desk clapped lightly. I kept typing. Blair continued. We're going to be improving public visibility for the unit. Command wants strong outreach. Her voice moved closer down the row of desks. Then it stopped, right beside mine. Well, she said slowly. I looked up. Blair was standing there with that same polished smile she used in recruiting photos. Perfect posture, perfect uniform. Her eyes scanned my desk, then my face. For half a second, she didn't react. Then recognition hit. Oh. The smile twisted slightly. Well, that's unexpected. A few heads turned around the office. Blair crossed her arms. What are you doing here? Working, I said. One of the analysts across the aisle looked confused. You two know each other? He asked. Blair answered before I could. She's my sister. That caught people's attention. Blair gave a small laugh. But don't get the wrong idea. She gestured casually toward my desk. She's just temporary admin support. The word hung in the air. Admin. Someone behind me muttered, Oh, Blair smiled like she had just clarified something important. She helps move paperwork around, Blair added. I watched the room absorb that explanation. No one questioned it. Rank has a way of shutting down curiosity. Blair leaned down slightly toward me, quiet enough that the others couldn't hear. You really followed me here, she whispered. I work here, not in any position that matters. She straightened and looked around again. Anyway, Blair continued loudly. I expect efficiency from everyone. Her eyes flicked back to me, especially family. The room slowly returned to work. Blair walked toward her new office. Then she stopped and turned around. Oh, one more thing, she pointed at me. You. I raised an eyebrow. My office needs cleaning, she said. Silence fell again across the desks. Blair spoke like it was the most normal request in the world. Dust the shelves, organize the files, that sort of thing. Someone coughed awkwardly. I leaned back slightly in my chair. That's not my job. Blair smiled. You're temporary staff. I'm not. Her smile faded. Careful, she said quietly. Her voice dropped enough that only I could hear. I'm a captain now. I nodded. I noticed. Blair's eyes hardened. I can write you up for insubordination. I looked at her for a second. Then I slowly turned one of my monitors toward her. Just enough for her to see the screen. Rows of numbers, budget approval logs, authorization chains, unit identifiers, her unit identifier. Blair squinted. What am I looking at? Financial oversight records. So your project funding requests come through here? Blair frowned. What does that have to do with anything? I turned the monitor back toward me. Nothing, I said. Blair didn't like that answer. You think you're clever, she said. I shrugged. I work with numbers. She leaned closer again. You work with paper, that too. Blair straightened up. Well, she said coldly, paper doesn't outrank a captain. I didn't respond. Because technically she was right. Paper doesn't outrank a captain, but the people who control the paper sometimes outrank colonels. Blair tapped my desk once with her finger. You have until the end of the day to clean my office. And if I don't, she smiled again, then we'll see how long your little admin job lasts. She turned and walked away before I could answer. The office slowly returned to normal noise, keyboards clicking, phones ringing. The analyst across the aisle rolled his chair toward me. Your sister seems intense, he said carefully. That's one word. You really admin support? I looked at my monitor. Rows of Blair's upcoming project expenditures were already sitting in the queue. Camera crews, contracted media consultants, equipment rentals, large numbers, very large numbers, waiting for approval. I clicked one file open, then another. Something like that, I said. Across the office, Blair's door closed, and behind that door, she was probably already planning how to spend money she didn't technically have yet. Money that needed exactly one thing before it could move: a signature, mine. I opened the first funding request Blair submitted that afternoon and leaned back in my chair. The numbers were big, not impossible, not illegal on the surface, but big enough to deserve attention. Her project title sat at the top of the screen: Regional Military Outreach and Public Readiness Initiative. That was a fancy way of saying PR media coverage, promotional events, equipment demonstrations, community outreach programs, the kind of projects that make a unit look good in front of cameras. The Army does those all the time. But usually the budgets are modest. Blair's proposal was not modest. Camera crews from 3 states, private media consultants, temporary equipment rentals, stage construction, travel expenses. The total number at the bottom of the screen was large enough to buy several armored vehicles. I scrolled slowly through the documentation. Every expense had paperwork attached. Every paper had a signature. Everything looked clean, almost too clean. I clicked into the vendor database and started checking the contractors listed in her request. 2 were legitimate companies. The third one raised my eyebrows. The company existed, but its address led to a shared office building with 30 other shell businesses. That didn't prove fraud, but it was a good place to start asking questions. I spent the rest of the afternoon pulling transaction histories, small transfers, unusual invoice structures, repeated billing patterns, the kind of patterns people miss when they're rushing through paperwork. But when you sit behind a desk long enough, numbers start talking. And Blair's numbers were getting louder. 3 days later, her office door swung open. Blair walked out holding a folder and wearing the confident smile she used whenever cameras were nearby. She stopped at my desk and dropped the folder in front of me. "Sign this," she said. I opened the folder. Inside were equipment purchase confirmations and a secondary financial authorization form. That wasn't unusual, but the signature line at the bottom already had a name written on it, my name. I stared at it for a second. Then I looked up. "You forged my signature." Blair didn't even blink. I expedited the process. "That's fraud. It's paperwork." I pushed the folder back toward her. "I'm not approving this." Blair's smile tightened. "You're not approving it because you're bitter. I'm not approving it because the vendor trail is dirty." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You're looking too hard. That's my job." Blair leaned forward, lowering her voice. "This project already has command interest. That doesn't make the numbers legal." She tapped the folder again. "You're making this complicated." I kept my hands on the desk. "You forged a financial authorization inside a military system." Blair exhaled slowly, then she smiled again. That smile always meant she had decided to switch tactics. "Fine," she said casually. She pulled another document from the folder and slid it across the desk. "This one, then." I glanced down. It was a financial responsibility acknowledgement form. Essentially, a promise. If the project expenses ran into problems, the signer would assume partial responsibility for the financial discrepancy. I looked back up. "You want me to cover the debt?" Blair shrugged. "It's just insurance. For you, for the unit." "That's not what this says." She folded her arms. "You're overthinking it." I slid the paper back toward her. "No." The office around us had gone quiet. People pretend not to listen in moments like that, but everyone hears everything. Blair's jaw tightened. "You owe me." I laughed quietly. That surprised her. "I owe you?" "You wouldn't even be in this building if it wasn't for me." I leaned back slightly. "That's an interesting version of history." Her voice dropped again. "You gave up West Point. I remember. You didn't make anything of yourself." "I joined the Army as support staff." Blair looked around the office. Then she said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've always been useless." The room went silent. I stood up slowly. "I'm not signing anything." Blair's face turned red. "You think sitting behind a desk makes you important? No. You count paper. That paper controls your funding." She laughed sharply. "You're not that powerful." I didn't say I was. Blair grabbed the folder off the desk. "You know what your problem is?" I waited. "You always thought sacrifice made you noble." Her voice echoed slightly in the open office. "But the truth is, you're just someone who couldn't compete." I didn't respond. Because arguing with Blair never changed her mind. She turned and walked toward the door leading outside to the training yard. Halfway there, she stopped and looked back. "Come with me," she said. I followed her outside. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet from earlier. A few soldiers were running drills across the yard. Blair stopped in the center of the pavement and turned to face me. "You're going to sign the responsibility form," she said quietly. "No, you don't understand how big this project is. I understand the numbers. You're sabotaging me." "You sabotaged yourself." Her hand moved before I even realized what she was doing. The slap echoed across the yard. A few soldiers froze mid-step. My head turned slightly from the impact. Blair stood there breathing hard. "You ungrateful piece of deadweight," she said. Her voice shook with anger. "I built a career while you sat behind a desk counting receipts." I looked back at her. "You built a career on forged signatures." Her eyes burned. "You're nothing," she snapped. "A useless sister who couldn't even become an officer." A couple of MPs near the vehicle bay had turned to look. Blair noticed them too, so she straightened her uniform and stepped closer to me. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked back toward the building like nothing had happened. The soldiers in the yard slowly returned to their drills. I stood there for a moment, tasting blood where my lip had split slightly. Then I wiped it with the back of my hand and walked back inside. My desk was exactly where I left it. The same monitors, the same paperwork, and the same financial authorization file still sitting open on my screen. Except now something else had appeared in the system. A finalized invoice batch, approved, authorized, and stamped with a digital signature that wasn't mine. I leaned closer to the screen. Blair hadn't just forged my name once. She had used it across multiple equipment invoices to withdraw funds through contractor reimbursements. Large amounts. Enough to trigger a forensic audit. I opened a new file, then another and another. Within 10 minutes, the pattern was clear. Blair's PR project wasn't just expensive. It was a cover, a way to move money through contractors and pull cash out of the system. I sat back in my chair and looked toward Blair's office door. The captain with the perfect reputation. The officer everyone liked to photograph. The white swan of the command staff. She thought the worst thing that happened today was slapping her sister in a training yard. She had no idea what the numbers were about to do to her career. Because the moment a forged authorization hits the oversight system, the audit clock starts ticking. And once it starts, it never stops. I stared at the forged authorization on my screen for a long second before I started downloading every document tied to Blair's project. Once the pattern shows up, the rest is just work. Invoice chains, vendor transfers, approval timestamps, digital signatures. Blair had used my authorization credentials across multiple transactions, but the system logs still recorded the originating workstation, her office computer. The mistake most people make when they forge something inside a military system is assuming the signature is the only thing that matters. It isn't. The system records everything: login times, terminal IDs, network routes. I exported the logs into a secure audit folder and started building the forensic file. By midnight, the structure was clear. The PR project wasn't just inflated. Money was moving through contractor reimbursements and then disappearing into external accounts. That kind of trail doesn't stay quiet for long. Once a forensic audit package is complete, it goes higher than unit command. A lot higher. I saved the final report and closed my laptop. The next morning, the entire unit seemed to be in celebration mode. Posters hung in the hallway announcing Blair's outreach event. A banner outside the operations building read, "Community Partnership Demonstration." Someone had even brought balloons. Blair loved theatrics. Around noon, one of the clerks walked over to my desk. "Captain Hartwell's celebration dinner is tonight," he said. "I heard. Family invited too." I nodded slowly. That explained the black SUV I saw pulling into the parking lot an hour later. My mother stepped out of the passenger side. Evelyn Hartwell always knew how to look like she belonged somewhere important. Elegant coat, hair perfectly styled. She walked into the building like she owned it. I kept working. An hour later, a message appeared in my inbox. "Captain Hartwell requests your presence in conference room B." Of course she did. When I walked into the conference room, the entire command team was there. Decorated officers, catered food, a cake with Blair's name on it. And standing beside Blair was our mother. Blair spotted me immediately. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said. Several officers turned to look. Blair raised her glass. "Everyone, this is my sister." A few polite nods around the room. Blair smiled. "She works in..." Administrative support. The room accepted that explanation without question. My mother stepped forward. Her expression was calm, controlled. "Thank you for coming," she said. That surprised me. Then Blair handed her a folder. Evelyn opened it and looked down at the papers inside. "Before we continue," she said, "there is a family matter that needs to be addressed." The room got quiet. My mother looked directly at me. "Your behavior lately has caused unnecessary embarrassment." I didn't respond. Blair folded her arms, enjoying the moment. Evelyn lifted a pen from the table. "I have updated the family will." She signed the document calmly. Then she placed the pen down. "You are no longer included." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. Blair gave a small nod like the decision made perfect sense. My mother closed the folder. "The Hartwell legacy is built on discipline and honor," she continued, "not resentment." Blair stepped beside her. "My sister has always struggled with responsibility," she added smoothly. I watched both of them. Neither seemed nervous. That meant Blair had already convinced her. Or maybe she didn't need to. Families sometimes pick their heroes early, and they rarely change their minds. My mother reached down and lifted something off the floor, a black trash bag. She held it out toward me. Inside were a few old clothes, some books, a pair of boots I left in the house years ago. "Take your things," she said. Blair added the final line. "This family doesn't have room for failures." The room was silent. Someone near the back cleared his throat. I took the bag. It was lighter than I expected. Blair watched my face carefully. She wanted a reaction, anger, desperation, anything that made her look justified. Instead, I nodded once. Understood. That seemed to disappoint her. "You're leaving the base tonight," Blair said. "That's not your authority," she smiled. "Command doesn't need distractions during a major project." One of the colonels near the wall spoke quietly. "Maybe we should keep this professional." Blair turned toward him. "It is professional." Then she looked back at me. "You're done here." I picked up the trash bag. No one stopped me when I walked out of the room. The hallway felt quiet after the noise of the party. I reached my desk and sat down. The forensic audit file was still open on my monitor, complete. Every forged signature, every financial transfer, every contractor payment, and the system logs proving where it all started. I copied the entire report onto an encrypted drive. Then I placed the drive inside the torn canvas bag, the same bag Blair laughed at outside the gate. Across the office, Blair's door was open. She was laughing with two officers about the success of her outreach event. She hadn't noticed what I was holding. That made sense. Blair had spent her entire life believing she controlled the story. I shut down my computer and stood up. The trash bag hung loosely in my hand. Everything I supposedly owned. But the real weight was inside the canvas bag on my shoulder. The forensic audit package. Once that file moved up the chain of command, the system would start asking questions Blair couldn't answer. I walked toward the exit quietly. No speeches, no arguments. Just one more soldier leaving the building. Behind me, the celebration in conference room B was still going. Laughter, glasses clinking. Blair probably giving another speech about leadership. They all believed tonight was the peak of her career. None of them knew it was the beginning of the investigation that would end it. I had just stepped outside the operations building with the trash bag in one hand and the canvas bag over my shoulder when my phone buzzed. "Unknown internal number," I answered. "This is Hartwell." A calm voice came through the line. "Specialist Hartwell, report to headquarters building 3, top floor." I stopped walking. "That's the command floor." "Yes." "Who's requesting office of the commanding general?" The line went quiet. Immediately the voice added. Then the call ended. I stood there for a second under the gray sky. Blair probably thought she had just finished removing me from the base. Instead, someone above her entire chain of command wanted to see me. Headquarters Building 3 sat at the center of Fort Liberty, like a concrete block that had survived every war since the Cold War. Not flashy, just serious. 2 MPs stood outside the main entrance. They checked my ID and waved me through. Inside, the hallways were quieter than the operations building. No balloons, no celebration banners. Just officers walking quickly with folders under their arms. I followed the signs to the command floor. When the elevator doors opened, a colonel was waiting in the hallway. He looked at my uniform and then at the canvas bag on my shoulder. "You're Hartwell." "Yes, sir. Come with me." We walked down the corridor in silence until we reached a large wooden door. The colonel knocked once and opened it. "Sir, she's here." I stepped inside. The office was bigger than anything in the operations building. Large desk, flags behind it, maps covering the wall. Standing near the window was a man I recognized immediately. General Thomas Sterling, 3 stars on his shoulder, one of the most senior commanders in the region. He turned slowly when I entered. "Specialist Hartwell." "Yes, sir." The colonel closed the door behind me and left the room. Sterling studied me for a moment. Not my uniform, my face. "You've had an interesting day," he said. "That's one way to put it." He gestured toward the chair in front of his desk. "Sit." I sat down and placed the canvas bag on the floor beside me. Sterling walked back to the desk and picked up a folder. It had Blair's name printed on the tab. "Captain Blair Hartwell," he said. "My sister. I'm aware." He flipped through the pages slowly. "These are her commendation reports." Sterling set the folder down. "According to this documentation, she led a hazardous containment operation during a weapons storage incident 3 years ago." I didn't say anything. Sterling leaned back in his chair. "The report describes chemical exposure, structural fire risk, and potential ammunition detonation." "Yes, sir." "And Captain Hartwell was credited with securing the facility." "That's what the report says." Sterling watched my face carefully. "You were stationed in the same region at the time." "Yes. And yet your name appears nowhere in the operation file." "That's correct." He tapped the folder once. "Interesting." The room went quiet. Sterling leaned forward slightly. "You were also assigned to financial oversight afterward." "Yes, sir." "And recently you completed a forensic audit involving Captain Hartwell's project." I reached down and pulled the encrypted drive from my bag. "Yes." I placed it on the desk. Sterling looked at it, but didn't pick it up yet. Instead, he asked something else. Before we discussed that, he said, "Tell me about the weapons depot incident." I shrugged slightly. It was chaotic. "That's not what the report says." The report was written later. Sterling stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped a few feet away from me. "Stand up." I stood. Sterling looked directly at my hands. "Roll up your sleeves." I hesitated for half a second. Then I did. The scars along my forearms were pale but obvious. Thin streaks across the skin. Burn patterns from chemical exposure. Sterling stared at them. He didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, he said quietly, "Those aren't minor injuries." "No, sir." "Chemical burns." "Yes." He looked back at the folder on the desk, then at me again. "The report states Captain Hartwell secured the facility personally." I kept my voice calm. "She arrived after the fire was contained." Sterling's jaw tightened slightly. "Who was inside the structure during the containment?" I was. The general looked down at my arms again. "You stayed inside long enough to close the chemical release valves." "Yes, sir." "That prevented the ammunition stacks from igniting." "Yes." Sterling walked back to the desk slowly. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Less formal, more controlled. "Why is none of that in the report?" "Because the report was written after Blair spoke to the media team." Sterling picked up the folder again. The pages made a quiet sound as he flipped through them. "Captain Hartwell received a commendation for heroism." "Yes." "Your name does not appear anywhere." "No." Sterling closed the folder. Then he finally picked up the encrypted drive I had placed on the desk. "And now you're delivering a forensic audit involving financial fraud connected to her project." "Yes, sir." He looked at the drive in his hand for a long moment. Then he looked up at me again. "Tell me something honestly, Specialist." "Yes, sir." "Did your sister know you were the one auditing her funding requests?" No, Miss Sterling nodded slowly. "That explains a lot." He set the drive on the desk beside Blair's commendation file. 2 pieces of evidence sitting next to each other. One about money, one about heroism, both telling very different stories. Sterling leaned back in his chair again and looked at my arms one more time. The color had drained slightly from his face because he had just realized something important. The woman being celebrated across the base as a hero wasn't the one who walked into the burning weapons depot that night. I watched General Sterling place the encrypted drive beside Blair's commendation file, and the room stayed quiet for several seconds. He didn't open the audit file immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me like he was putting together a puzzle he didn't expect to solve today. "Specialist Hartwell," he said. "Yes, sir. Where are you supposed to be right now, leaving the base?" Sterling nodded once. "That's what the report on my desk says." He tapped another document. "Administrative separation request, filed that morning. Blair's name was on the recommendation line. Interesting timing, Sterling said. I didn't answer. He stood up and walked to the window looking down at the base. Across the parade ground, crews were setting up a stage. Banners, chairs, camera equipment, Blair's event. Sterling glanced at his watch. Captain Hartwell's ceremony begins in 40 minutes. Yes, sir. Public recognition for her outreach project and prior commendations. That sounds right. Sterling turned back toward me. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled slightly. Good, he said. Because I would hate for you to miss it, I frowned. Sir Sterling pressed the intercom button on his desk. Colonel Reeves, come back in here. The door opened a moment later. The colonel stepped inside. Yes, sir, Sterling gestured toward me. Have logistics pull a full dress uniform from secure storage. The colonel blinked. For her, yes. Sir, she's listed as logistics support personnel. Sterling looked at him calmly. Not in the file I'm looking at. The colonel glanced between us. What rank? Sir Sterling flipped open another document. Then he read the line slowly. Colonel, the colonel's eyebrows moved slightly. Yes, sir. Make sure the decorations are correct. He paused. And make it fast. The colonel left without another question. I looked at Sterling. Sir. I think there's a misunderstanding. Sterling shook his head. No. He tapped Blair's commendation file. The misunderstanding has been happening for 3 years. 20 minutes later, I stood in a small preparation room near the command hall. A garment rack held a formal dress uniform, dark blue, perfectly pressed. Colonel's eagle insignia on the shoulders, rows of ribbons across the chest, and several medals that had never been publicly displayed. The same medals Blair had been building her reputation around. Colonel Reeves handed me the jacket. Try it on. I hesitated. Then I did. The fabric settled onto my shoulders like it remembered where it belonged. Reeves stepped back and looked at the uniform. Fits, he said. He pointed to the ribbons. You've had a quiet career. That's one way to describe it. He nodded once. General Sterling wants you standing behind the stage curtain during the ceremony. Why, you'll see. A few minutes later, we walked toward the main hall. The place was packed. Officers, media staff, local reporters, rows of soldiers sitting in formation. At the center of the stage stood Blair. Perfect posture, perfect uniform, perfect smile. A banner behind her read, Regional Command Recognition Ceremony. Sterling stepped onto the stage to applause. Blair looked confident. She had no reason not to. Everything in her career had gone exactly the way she planned. Sterling began speaking. Today we recognize leadership, dedication, and courage within this command. The audience clapped politely. Blair stood tall. Sterling continued. Captain Blair Hartwell has received considerable attention for her recent outreach initiative. More applause. Blair nodded to the audience like she was accepting a crown. Sterling raised a hand slightly. The room quieted, but recognition, he continued, should always be accurate. Blair's smile flickered. Sterling looked toward the side of the stage. Some stories require clarification. Blair shifted slightly. Sterling's voice carried across the hall. 3 years ago, a hazardous incident occurred at a regional weapons storage depot. Blair relaxed again. That story had built her reputation. Sterling continued calmly. The official report credited Captain Hartwell with securing the facility during a chemical containment emergency. The audience listened quietly. Sterling paused. Then he said something that made Blair's shoulders stiffen. That report was incomplete. Murmurs moved through the room. Blair's eyes flicked toward Sterling. Sterling turned toward the curtain. Colonel Hartwell, he said, please step forward. For half a second, the room didn't react. Then I stepped out from behind the curtain. The sound in the hall disappeared. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the stage. I walked forward slowly, not in the old faded jacket Blair mocked, not carrying a torn canvas bag, but in a full dress uniform with colonel insignia and decorations that most of the room had never seen before. Blair stared at me. Her face lost color instantly. Sterling continued speaking. The officer standing beside me entered that weapons depot during the containment failure. He gestured toward my arms. The chemical burns she carries are from closing the release valves before the ammunition stacks ignited. The audience was silent. Sterling's voice hardened slightly. She did it while her commanding officer waited outside. Blair didn't move. Her expression looked like someone had removed the floor beneath her feet. Sterling picked up the commendation file from the podium. This report credited the wrong person. He set the file down. Then he picked up a second folder. The same officer who risked her life during that incident also completed a forensic audit earlier today. He looked directly at Blair. That audit discovered forged financial authorizations connected to Captain Hartwell's recent project. Gasps moved through the audience. Blair opened her mouth, but no words came out. Sterling's final sentence cut through the hall. Recognition in this command belongs to those who bleed for it. He glanced at the forged signature documents, not to those who fake signatures to steal it. The entire room stayed frozen. Because the hero they had been applauding 5 minutes earlier was now standing on stage, realizing her entire career had just collapsed in front of everyone. I stood beside General Sterling on the stage while the room tried to process what it had just heard. Blair still hadn't moved. Her eyes were locked on the eagle insignia on my shoulders, like they might disappear if she stared long enough. Sterling didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Colonel Hartwell," he said calmly. "Yes, sir. Please continue." I stepped toward the podium. The projector screen behind us was still showing the ceremony banner. I picked up the remote from the lectern and pressed one button. The banner disappeared. A new screen appeared. File header. Forensic Audit, Command Oversight Division. The room got even quieter. Blair finally spoke. "This is ridiculous," she said. Her voice sounded thin now. Sterling didn't look at her. "Continue," he told me. I clicked the next slide. Rows of financial transactions filled the screen. Contract payments, vendor reimbursements, cash withdrawals routed through third-party contractors. I spoke into the microphone. Over the last 4 months, Captain Hartwell authorized multiple contractor payments tied to the outreach project. I clicked again. A red circle appeared around a digital signature. My authorization signature appears on these approvals. Blair found her voice again. "Because you signed them," she said quickly. I didn't look at her. I clicked another slide. System logs appeared. Terminal ID numbers, login timestamps, origin workstation. "This is the internal access log for those authorizations," I said. The audience leaned forward slightly. The approvals were submitted from Captain Hartwell's office terminal. Blair shook her head. "That's impossible." I clicked again. The screen zoomed in on a specific line. User Terminal Office C214. Blair's office. I continued calmly. The signature was copied. Another slide appeared. Digital comparison between my real signature and the forged one. The differences were small, but clear. Forgery detection software doesn't miss those. Blair's breathing was louder now. "You're twisting data," she said. Sterling remained silent. I pressed the remote again. The next slide showed contractor payments routed into an external account. Funds from those invoices were transferred into a private investment account. The account holder name appeared on the screen. B. Hartwell. The room reacted this time. Whispers. Movement. Blair stepped forward. "This is a personal attack." I clicked the next slide. Video footage filled the screen. Security camera timestamp. Fort Liberty Gate. Rain pouring down. The footage was from earlier that morning. Blair's SUV, the window rolling down, my torn bag in my hand. The entire conversation played silently while subtitles appeared underneath. "You look like a beggar. You're embarrassing the family. You're not part of this place anymore." The room watched the video without making a sound. Blair looked like someone had drained all the blood from her face. She turned toward Sterling. "This video proves nothing." I pressed the remote again. The video paused. Another file icon appeared. Audio recording. I hit play. Blair's voice came through the speakers. Clear, sharp, "You're good with numbers. You'll cover it if anything goes wrong." The recording continued. "You're basically an ATM with a uniform." A few officers in the front row exchanged looks. Blair's eyes darted across the room. "That conversation is taken out of context." I clicked again. A final audio clip started. Blair's voice again, this time quieter, but unmistakable. "Just copy her authorization signature. Nobody checks those." The recording ended. The silence in the hall felt heavy now. Blair looked like she couldn't decide whether to run or scream. 4 minutes. That's all it had taken. 4 minutes of evidence. 4 minutes to erase the reputation she spent years building. I lowered the remote. Captain Hartwell's outreach project, I said calmly, was used to move unauthorized funds through contractor reimbursements. I glanced at Sterling. The complete forensic audit has already been submitted to command oversight. Blair shook her head again. "This is insane." Her voice cracked. Then she turned toward the audience. "My sister has always been jealous of me." No one responded. Blair's eyes moved quickly across the room, searching for support. Then she spotted someone near the back. "Mom," she said. Evelyn Hartwell stood up immediately. "This is a misunderstanding," my mother said loudly. She started walking toward the stage. A tall man stood up beside her. "Grant, my older brother," he looked furious. "This is family business," Grant said. He started pushing through the row of chairs. "You can't destroy someone's career over a personal grudge." 2 MPs stepped into the aisle. "Sir, stop!" Grant ignored them. "That's my sister up there," he snapped. The MPs moved in front of him. "You need to sit down." My mother tried to step around them. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "You're humiliating my daughter." One of the MPs spoke calmly. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." Grant raised his voice. She forged nothing. The MP didn't move. "Sir, this is now an active investigation." Grant looked toward Blair. Blair looked back at him. For the first time in her life, she looked scared. Not angry, not confident, just scared. Because the story she built her entire identity around had collapsed in front of everyone. Sterling stepped forward again. "Military police," he said. "Yes, sir. Escort Captain Hartwell to the command office." Blair stared at him. "You can't be serious." Sterling's voice stayed calm. "The evidence is already logged in the system." Blair's voice shook. "You're ruining my career." Sterling looked at her quietly. "No, Captain." Then he nodded toward the screen, still showing the forged signatures. "You already did that yourself." I watched the MPs escort Blair off the stage, while the entire hall stayed silent. No shouting, no applause, just the sound of boots moving across the floor, and the quiet buzz of people realizing they had just witnessed the end of someone's career. Blair tried to keep her posture straight while the MPs walked beside her. That lasted about 5 steps. Then the reality hit. "You're making a mistake," she said, looking back at General Sterling. Her voice sounded smaller now. Sterling didn't raise his voice. "Captain Hartwell," he said calmly, "you will have the opportunity to present your defense during the investigation. That audit is wrong." Sterling glanced at the screen behind him. "The system logs disagree." Blair looked toward the audience. Her eyes found our mother. Evelyn looked pale for the first time that day. Grant tried to stand again, but the MPs beside him shook their heads. Blair's voice cracked slightly. "You're just going to let her destroy everything I built." Sterling answered without hesitation. "No one destroyed it." He nodded toward the projector screen, still showing the forged authorizations. "You signed the documents." The MPs guided Blair toward the exit. For the first time in years, she didn't have an answer ready. The doors closed behind her. The ceremony was over, not officially, but everyone in the room knew it. Sterling turned back toward the audience. "This event is concluded," he said. Chairs started moving. Officers stood up slowly, speaking in low voices. A few reporters shut off their cameras. No one tried to interview Blair. There was nothing left to say. I stepped away from the podium while the room emptied. General Sterling walked over a moment later. "You handled that professionally," he said. "I just presented the evidence." Sterling nodded once. "That's usually enough." He looked at the rows of empty chairs. "You understand what happens next?" "Yes, sir. A formal investigation. And a court-martial." Sterling studied my face. "You don't look happy about it." I thought about that for a second. Then I said the truth. "I'm not celebrating." Sterling nodded slowly. "That's probably why you ended up where you are." He glanced at the colonel insignia on my shoulders. "You've spent most of your career operating quietly. That was the assignment." "Still is," he said. Sterling extended his hand. I shook it. "You did the right thing," he said. Then he walked toward the exit with the other officers. The hall emptied within minutes. Only a few MPS and technicians remained. I stepped off the stage and walked outside. The afternoon air felt colder than before. The same base, the same buildings, but everything felt different now. Over the next few months, the investigation moved exactly the way military investigations always move. Slow, precise, unavoidable. The forensic audit held up under review. Every forged authorization, every contractor transfer, every bank record. Blair's lawyers tried to argue procedural errors. They tried to argue personal conflict. They even tried to question the authenticity of the system logs. None of it worked. Digital records don't lie easily. The court-martial stripped Blair of her rank. Dishonorable discharge. Multiple counts tied to fraud and falsification of military documents. The same officers who once praised her leadership now read the verdict without emotion. Grant stopped calling after the first month. Our mother tried once. She left a voicemail saying the family needed to talk. I didn't return the call, not out of anger, just because there wasn't much left to say. A few weeks after the trial ended, I drove back to the old house. The bank still held the mortgage Blair created. The same kitchen table was still inside. Same solder burn marks from my father's tools. The place smelled like dust and old wood. I stood in the doorway for a while before sitting down at the table. Then I opened my laptop. 12 years of Army pay, deployment bonuses, savings from assignments where I didn't spend much money. I transferred everything into one account. Then I called the bank. 2 hours later, the mortgage was paid off. The house was ours again, but I didn't keep it. A month after that, construction crews started arriving. Medical equipment, renovated bedrooms, therapy rooms, physical rehabilitation equipment. The sign outside changed. Hartwell Veterans Recovery Center. No cameras, no banners, just a quiet place where injured soldiers could stay while rebuilding their lives. Sometimes the men and women who showed up there recognized the uniform. Sometimes they didn't. Either way didn't matter. Work like that doesn't need applause. 1 year later, I found myself standing at the same gate at Fort Liberty again. The rain wasn't falling this time. The guard at the checkpoint looked at my ID. Then he glanced at the insignia on my collar. "Good morning, Colonel." "Morning." He handed the ID back and opened the gate. I stepped forward. My boots were the same ones Blair laughed at that morning. Still old, still polished, still comfortable after all those miles. I walked through the gate without stopping. Because sometimes the strongest kind of victory isn't the moment everyone watches. Sometimes it's the quiet step you take afterward when you realize you didn't need their approval to keep moving. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something. If someone in your own family betrayed you the way Blair did, would you walk away and build a new life? Or would you ever consider giving them a second chance? Tell me what you think in the comments, and if stories about resilience and justice matter to you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I locked the front door of the Hartwell Veterans Recovery Center one evening and stood on the porch for a minute before walking to my truck. The sun was setting behind the trees and the yard was quiet again. Most days ended like that now. No shouting, no investigations, no courtrooms, just quiet. For a long time after everything happened with Blair, people kept asking me the same question. Usually they asked it carefully like they were afraid of the answer. How did you live with that for so long? At first I didn't know how to respond. Because when you live inside a situation for years, it doesn't feel dramatic while it's happening. It just feels normal. That's the dangerous part about betrayal. It rarely starts with something obvious. It starts with small compromises. One small favor, one financial help, one decision to stay quiet because you don't want to cause trouble. And before you realize it, you've spent years carrying someone else's problems. Looking back now, the first lesson I learned from everything that happened with Blair is simple. Family doesn't automatically mean loyalty. That sounds harsh, especially to people who grew up believing family always comes first. I used to believe that too. When Blair got into West Point, I told myself that giving up my slot was the right thing to do. Our father was sick. Someone had to stay. So I stayed. At the time, I didn't feel like I sacrificed anything. I thought I was helping the family move forward. But here's something I didn't understand back then. Helping someone once is kindness. Helping someone forever while they take advantage of you is not kindness. It's permission. Blair didn't suddenly become the person who used my name to steal money from the Army. She became that person slowly. Every time I fixed one of her problems. Every time I paid off one of her debts. Every time I stayed quiet because I thought family loyalty required it. People sometimes ask if I regret helping her. The answer is no. Because regret would mean the help itself was wrong. Helping someone is never wrong. But ignoring the moment when help turns into exploitation, that part matters. That was my second lesson. Self-respect isn't loud. It doesn't look dramatic. Most of the time, it looks like a quiet decision. The moment you stop allowing someone to treat you like you're less important. For years, Blair thought I was weak. She thought my silence meant she had control. But silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes silence means someone is watching, observing, recording, waiting until the truth has enough weight to stand on its own. A lot of people think justice happens because someone fights harder. In reality, justice usually happens because someone stayed patient long enough to gather the truth. That's exactly what happened in my case. When Blair slapped me in the training yard, people saw a dramatic moment. But the real turning point had already happened long before that. It happened the day I stopped fixing her mistakes. Instead of cleaning up her financial mess, I started documenting it. Instead of arguing with her, I let the numbers speak. Because numbers don't care about reputation. They don't care about rank. They don't care about family. They only care about accuracy. And eventually, accuracy wins. Another lesson I learned is something I wish more people understood earlier in life. Being the quiet person in the room doesn't make you invisible. It makes you underestimated. And being underestimated can be a powerful advantage. Blair built her career by controlling the story people believed about her. Heroic officer, strong leader, perfect example of military professionalism. But stories fall apart when evidence appears. That's why integrity matters so much. Integrity is what protects you when the story changes. When the investigation started, I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need speeches. I didn't need witnesses. I had records. And records don't panic under pressure. If you're listening to this and you've ever been in a situation where someone takes credit for your work or treats you like you don't matter, here's the advice I wish someone had given me years ago. First, document everything, not because you're planning revenge, but because memory is fragile and evidence is not. Emails, transactions, approvals, conversations that affect your responsibilities. Write them down. Second, don't waste energy trying to convince someone who has already decided you're wrong. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make. They keep arguing, hoping the other person will suddenly become reasonable. But people who benefit from misunderstanding you rarely want the truth. The truth threatens their position. So instead of arguing, focus on building your own position. Skills, reputation, proof of your work. The stronger your foundation becomes, the less power those people have over your life. And the third piece of advice is probably the most important. Never confuse kindness with surrender. You can help people. You can forgive people. But you should never erase yourself in the process. Because once someone believes you will always sacrifice your own future for their comfort, they will stop respecting you entirely. Respect starts the moment you set boundaries. Sometimes those boundaries come late. Mine did. But even a late boundary is better than none. When I look back at the last 12 years, I don't think about Blair's betrayal as the defining moment. The defining moment was realizing something about myself. I wasn't the weak sister standing outside a gate with a torn bag. I was the person who stayed calm long enough to let the truth catch up. And in the end, that made all the difference. I was tightening the screws on a handrail outside the therapy room when one of the veterans staying at the center asked me a question. He was a former infantry sergeant named Cole, mid-30s, one leg replaced with a carbon fiber prosthetic and a sense of humor that somehow survived everything he went through. He watched me working for a moment before speaking. "Can I ask you something, Colonel Schur?" He leaned back in the chair. "You ever get tired of being the strong one?" I stopped turning the screwdriver and thought about the question, not because it was difficult, because it was honest. "Yeah," I said. Cole nodded like he already expected that answer. Most people think strength looks dramatic. They picture speeches, victories, medals, headlines. But real strength rarely looks like that. Most of the time, it looks quiet. It looks like getting up in the morning and continuing your life after someone you trusted betrayed you. It looks like doing the right thing even when nobody is watching anymore. After Blair's court-martial, a lot of people expected me to feel satisfied. They expected some kind of victory speech. But the truth is simpler. Watching someone fall isn't nearly as satisfying as people imagine, especially when that person used to be family. That was the first thing I learned after everything ended. Winning an argument doesn't fix what betrayal breaks. What fixes it is distance, time, and the decision to build something better than what you lost. For me, that something became the recovery center. When the first group of injured veterans arrived, none of them knew the story behind the place. They didn't care about my sister. They didn't care about the investigation. They cared about learning how to walk again, learning how to sleep without nightmares, learning how to live with bodies that didn't work the same way anymore. Watching them rebuild their lives changed the way I looked at my own problems. Because betrayal hurts, but it doesn't define you unless you let it. One afternoon, a young corporal asked me why I turned the house into a recovery center instead of selling it. The question made sense. That house held a lot of bad memories, arguments, debt, years of stress. Selling it would have been easier, But easy wasn't the point. My father used to say something when we were kids. Your character shows up when nobody is watching. At the time, I thought he meant small things. Cleaning your gear, keeping your word, showing up on time. What I didn't understand then was that he meant something bigger. Character is the decision you make after someone treats you badly. You can become bitter, or you can build something better. Both choices are understandable, but only one moves your life forward. That doesn't mean forgiveness happens overnight. People misunderstand forgiveness all the time. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending something didn't happen, and it definitely doesn't mean inviting someone back into your life so they can repeat the same behavior. Forgiveness is simply the moment you stop carrying the anger. You put it down because it's heavy, not because the other person deserves relief, but because you deserve peace. Blair and I haven't spoken since the trial. Maybe someday we will. Maybe we won't. Either way, my life doesn't depend on that conversation anymore. That's another lesson I wish more people understood earlier. Closure isn't something other people give you. It's something you create when you decide to move forward. If you're listening to this story and you recognize pieces of your own life in it, I want to leave you with 3 practical pieces of advice. Not dramatic advice, just things that actually work in the real world. First, pay attention to patterns. Anyone can make a mistake once, but repeated behavior tells the truth about a person. If someone constantly asks for help but never accepts responsibility, that pattern matters. Second, protect your boundaries early. The longer you allow someone to cross them, the harder it becomes to change the relationship later. People get used to the version of you that tolerates everything. When that version disappears, they call you difficult. But protecting your limits isn't selfish. It's necessary. And the third thing is something the military teaches very well. Focus on what you can control. You can't control how people talk about you. You can't control whether someone appreciates what you've done. But you can control your actions, your honesty, your discipline, your response when things go wrong. And in the long run, those things matter more than reputation. Because reputation is a story other people tell about you. Integrity is the truth you live with every day. Cole watched me finish tightening the handrail and shook his head slightly. You talk like a commander, he said. I laughed. Old habit. He tapped his prosthetic leg against the floor. You know what I think? What I think the quiet people end up stronger than the loud ones. I stood up and wiped my hands on a towel. Why's that? He grinned. Because they've been carrying weight nobody else noticed. I thought about that for a moment, then I nodded. Yeah, I said. Something like that. Before we finish the story, I want to ask you one final question. If someone in your life betrayed your trust, the way Blair did, do you believe people like that deserve a second chance someday? Or do some actions permanently close that door? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about integrity, resilience, and quiet strength matter to you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction, but the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.